rainy weather and Saturday morning. I really appreciate that you came here to join us for the assembly, which is dedicated to the colonial movements and I would say processes that are going on in contemporary Europe. I just wanted to mention that this idea to dedicate this date to the decoloniality belongs to Studio Vizova. And the first part of this program took place already even earlier in the morning at Museum de Civiltà and was dedicated to the relationships between Europe and Africa. And now this second part, which will be quite long, which will last for 5 hours, will be dedicated to the, I would say, much lesser known history of colonialism, which is the colonialism of Russian Federation. And we call this assembly the colonial war in Europe. We call it decolonial to stress that, as I believe, this war is not only a tragedy, which it is, but also a historical chance to fight against the very long history of Russian colonialism and a chance for a different future for Ukraine, for Europe, but also for many other people who have been oppressed by and colonized and oppressed by Russia for centuries, and whose history is unfortunately is almost unknown in the West, in the Europe, and I think it's a really precious chance for today to know more about these dark spots in our common knowledge. And also we call this assembly the colonial war in Europe to stress that despite the images that we see every day in media shows us violence and atrocities in Ukraine, and it creates probably the feeling or impression that this violence is let's say, as many people say, problem localized in certain territory, but I believe it's not true, and this war has a much global significance than just the relationships between Russia and Ukraine, and we will speak today a lot about this. Yes, and I think it's also important to understand for all of us that this war that is going on in Ukraine now is a colonial war, actually. A colonial war which with a colonial goals, which aims to seize the new territories in order to exploit the sources of these territories as well as people. And if you follow the news, you probably know that the Russian politics at the occupied territories, politics toward the people who live in these territories, it's given just two options: either to be exterminated physically, or to be exterminated as a political or cultural or economical subjects and be turned to the slaves, also to the mere source of this colonial imperial power. And also I wanted to say that this war of excessive, and I would even say abundant violence is possible basically for two reasons. First of which is centuries and centuries of the imperialist politics by Russian Federation and its centuries of colonial wars, many of which has been successful and enabled to expand its territory at this enormously huge scale, where most of the people who live at these territories are exploited just for the sake of profit of a small group. And this politic of extractivism, exploitation, and expansion is exactly what enabled this excessive accumulation of wealth, which are now spent for the further expansion and further violence against Ukraine in this case. And second reason why this war is possible is because Russia is not alone in this endeavor. It has its allies. We know, I think a lot of you know about the Iranian drones that is killing Ukrainian people, but it's just mostly the most visible trace. There are many other gestures, political decisions, actions that make it possible for Russia to keep this war going despite of its numerous defeats and despite that it is not, like, it's less and less supported even by the people who live in Russia. But it's important to understand that, again, despite the impression that it is something localized in certain territory, it is actually a global conflict which involves many other subjects, not only Ukraine and Russia. And of course it is important to understand that this resistance of Ukraine against much bigger and much more powerful state is possible also because of the international solidarity. Today's assembly, I think, it's another step in enhancing this international solidarity in the current situation, which I think is extremely important. And I'm happy to be able to create this chance for all of us, and for me in particular, to know more about the roots of this war, because I know that many people in the West believe that there is a conflict between Russia and NATO, let's say, one of the theories, but I think that today's conversation will show you that the history of Russian imperialism is much, much longer than the existence of NATO, actually. And I'm really happy that today you will meet the people who has also a long history of struggle against Russian colonialism and imperialism, the struggle which unfortunately has been ignored or invisible for many of us, for Europe, for the West, for the world in general, and the struggle was invisible along with this oppression that took place for centuries at the territories which now belongs to Russian Federation, that also was invisible and ignored by many of us. So I think I'm really happy that we have this chance today to expand our knowledge and our understanding of this situation that captures our attention during recent year. And I'm happy to introduce you the first event in this assembly, the panel discussion, which is called Decolonizing Russia, Forgotten Histories and Expected Futures, which will be moderated by Amir Stufulin, who is a guest fellow at Biblioteca Hartesiana, art historian and visual culture researchers. And the guest of these panels, which I'm really proud to have here, is activists of liberation movements of the people, of the colonized peoples of Russian Federation, or maybe better to say people colonized the Russian Federation. Rajana Dugarde Ponte, leader of Buryat liberation movement, Ruslan Kabas, leader of Bashkir liberation movement, and Rafis Kashapov, leader of Tatarstan liberation movement, independence movement. So I now give floor to Amir, and he will introduce you more the topic of this specific discussion and tell you more about the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, my gratitude to Lesia, but also the teams and workers of the European Pavillion and the Goethe Institute for this opportunity. It's my honor and privilege to moderate today's discussion, Decolonizing Russia, Forgotten Histories and Expected Futures. I hope it will highlight the first and the forgotten histories and outline the second, the expected futures, and foremost will give the voice to existential struggle of the indigenous people living on the lands bearing today the misleading name of Russian territories against centuries-long violent oppression and colonization. To give you a little bit of historical context, since somehow since around 16th century, and ongoing, various people of the area stretching from the Caucasus to Siberia have been victims of the Muscovite state under different names. its settler colonial policies have been extracting cultural and natural wealth from those people and lands. Just to name those represented today in today's discussion, the Tatars since 1552 have been subjugated to Moscow, the Bashkirs since 1556, and the Buryats since 1660. The oppression is ongoing, these events has not yet ended, and in 2014 Moscow set its eyes once again on Ukraine. Today's conversation on decolonizing Russia takes place here in Rome, but it is happening because elsewhere in Ukraine, peoples of Ukraine collectively struggle against colonial invasion of Russia. Since its beginning in 2014, Russia's war on Ukraine has been a colonial and imperialist war, and Ukrainian resistance has been an anti-colonial and anti-imperialist resistance. The coloniality of the Russian war is reflected not only on the choice of who it intends to subjugate this time, but also in the deliberate choice of who the state sends to die. From the first day of the war up to the mobilization, proportionally to the number of population, it is predominantly indigenous people who are sent first to the front lines, leaving empty whole rural communities where many indigenous peoples reside, which is a form of ethnic cleansing happening today. The war launched in the name of Russian world is fought with blood of people who have historically suffered most from it, and it is not the war in their name, it is not the war in our name. Hence, in order to stop Russian invasion, it is paramount to support armed resistance of Ukraine. Conversely, in order to hold the oppression of Russian imperialism in Russia and beyond, now and in future, it is paramount for the empire to die, for Russian state to break up, and let the people colonized by it to finally self-organize and self-govern. Franz Fanon wrote, "Imperialism leaves behind germs of rot, which we must clinically detect and remove from our land, but from our minds as well. Following on this, it is my appeal on you, arm Ukraine, but also be conscious of the struggle of the indigenous people within Russia." And it is for the latter that I'm honored to give word to some of the leading activists of the indigenous decolonial struggle who were already been introduced by Lesa, but I say once more, Rafis Kashapov, to my left, founder of the Free Ural movement and a deputy prime minister of the self-proclaimed Tatar government in exile. To my right, Rajana Ducar de Ponte, one of the leaders of the Buryat national movement. And finally, to my left, co-founder of the League of Free Nation, also co-founder of the Free Nation movement, and Ruslan Gabasov, head of the Bashkir National Political Center. And many thanks also for Sasha for translating this. Thank you very much. And maybe now I could ask you to make a brief introduction to what is your movement about right now in your own words, if possible. Maybe starting with Rafis.
Thank you very much. I little speak English, sorry.
His thanks and excuses for little knowledge of English, so he'll switch to Russian.
Я являюсь зампремьер-министром изгнанных татар за рубежом. Наша глава живет в Вильмерзайне, США, Америки.
He's the deputy minister of the self-proclaimed Tatarstan Republic, and the head of the organization. She lives in England, USA.
За последнее время мы создали в Украине свободный Урал.
Recently, they have created in Ukraine the Free Ural organization.
Позже было создано в Варшаве, тоже с участием украинцев, было создано форум свободных народов пост России.
And later in Warsaw, they created the Forum of Free Nations in post-Russia.
А уже еще позже была создана Лига свободных наций. Вот Руслан, вот мы троем представляем, я представляю татар, Рустам башкир, бурят Джаранов представляет. Вот мы трое представителей находимся здесь. Огромное спасибо за то, что вы встречаете нас в таком теплом Риме.
And so those three people created the Free Nations League, and they represent Tatars, Bashkirs, and Buryat peoples, and they are really thankful for the warm welcome in Rome.
Сегодня, как мы видим, весь мир видит и осуждает, как в Украине российские войска уничтожают украинцев, не только украинцев, разрушаются города.
Yeah, the whole world is now witnessing how Russian military is destroying cities and killing people in Ukraine, and they're denouncing this and seeing it as unacceptable.
470 лет назад наше татарское Казанское ханство почти в таком же формате было уничтожено, но уже больше последствиями, убийствами.
Yeah, and 470 years ago, Tatar Khazanat, the state where Tatars actually lived, was destroyed in a very similar way, using extermination and capturing territories.
Мы в России, казанские татары, занимаем второе место после русских по численности.
Kazan Tatars take the second place by the population in Russian Federation.
Однако, несмотря на это, хотя мы многомиллионные татары находимся в пространстве Евразии, в России, уничтожается наша идентичность, наш язык, культура, религия, обычаи нашего народа, татарского народа.
Although millions of Tatar inhabit the territory of Eurasia, their identity and culture is being killed and destroyed.
Hello? Yeah, maybe Rojana can say something.
Hello, my name is Rajana Dugar de Ponte, and I am a representative of the Buryat Mongolian democratic movement RHTM, which means people, the champions of the law, of the right of peoples. And I am also a member of the Free Nations League, and this organization was created shortly after the start of this horrible war, and it unites representatives of Bashkirs, Kalmyks, Buryats, Tatars, Sakha, Yakuts, Chechens, Ichkeria, Cossacks, Kalmyks, and also regionalist movements such as Ingermanlandian movement. And the reason for us to come together was that we decided that this is enough. We had enough of Russian imperialism. We have enough of being colonies that denied our right to exist, that denied our right to speak our languages. And we decided that only coming together, being united, we have this opportunity to finally get our sovereignty and independence. Because being together, it will be extremely difficult for the central state to subjugate us again. And we have this legend in this secret history of Mongols. And this similar legend actually exists with every people. the foremother of the golden king of Genghis Khan, Alangua, once brought together her sons who were fighting with each other, and she gave each of them a little twig, and she told them to break the twig, and the children could do it easily. Then she gave them 2 twigs and 3 twigs, and they were still able to break, and then she gave each of them a bunch of them, and they were unable to break those twigs. And so she taught them a lesson, and she said, you need to stick together, and no one will be able to defeat you. And that's what we are doing now. Thank you.
Салам алейкум. Меня зовут Руслан Кабасов. Я являюсь руководителем Башкирского национально-политического центра.
Hello, my name is Ruslan Kavasov. I'm the leader of Bashkirский political center.
Также в прошлом я был одним из основателей башкирской организации под названием Башкорт, которую признали экстремистской на территории Российской Федерации и запретили российские власти.
Also, I'm a former founder of organization Bashkort, which was proclaimed as extremist in Russia and condemned, so its activities prohibited.
Наш башкирский народ практически полтысячелетия находится в составе Российской империи и постоянно подвергается дискриминации, ассимиляции, геноциду и так далее.
Our Bashkir people is almost 500 years is included into the Russian Empire, and it is constantly under the process of assimilation, genocide.
Наш народ является по численности больше, чем такой народ европейский, как латыши, как эстонцы, допустим. Но о нас практически не знают. Если взять, допустим, татар, то их больше, чем и эстонцев, и латышей, и литовцев вместе взятых. Однако вы эти народы знаете, а наших народов вы практически не знаете.
Our population exceeds, for instance, the population of Latvia or Estonia, and for instance, the population of Tatars is more than population of Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania altogether. But Europeans are largely familiar with Lithuanian and Latvian culture, but knows hardly anything about our people.
Сегодня Российская империя, я ее называю империей, она ведет самую настоящую агрессивную войну против Украины.
Today, Russian Empire, I call it Russian Empire, is leading an aggressive war on Ukraine.
Совершая таким образом геноцид. Но она одновременно, Россия делает 2 геноцида. Один по отношению к украинскому народу, а другой геноцид по отношению к коренным колонизированным народам Российской Федерации.
So what they are doing is actually genocide, but they are involved in 2 genocides. Genocides of Ukrainian people and of their ethnic indigenous people who inhabited the territory of Russia.
Сегодня уже ни для кого не секрет, что войска российской армии непропорциональное большинство именно представителей военнослужащих из коренных народов, таких как буряты, башкиры, татары, чеченцы и так далее. Их больше, чем пропорциональности, больше, чем русских.
It's not a secret that the proportion of people from Buryat, Tatar, Bashkir, Chechen is much larger than the proportion of Russian people in army involved in war in Ukraine.
И таким образом они уничтожают нашу пассионарную часть мужского населения. Нас и так мало, а нас еще больше уничтожают.
This way, they are killing the active passionnel part of our population, although it is not big at all, even without that.
Мы, башкиры, раньше воевали, поднимали восстание, чтобы освободиться от этой империи. Наш народ больше 200 лет поднимал восстание.
Bashkirs for almost 200 years used to make attempts of revolt against colonization.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I just was thinking, wanted to ask you a question relating to, I guess, political imagination. Obviously, this is not reality right now, that there's an opportunity to self-govern and self-determine. But what kind of future would you imagine in this movement, and when this to be succeeded? Yeah, thank you.
Мы казанские татары, есть еще крымские татары, но мы, казанские татары, в свое время пространство Евразии создавали Касымские ханства, Сибирские ханства, Астраханские ханства, Казанское. Мы были в семействе тюркских народов. Мы, казанские татары, государство, образующий народ.
We Kazan Tatars, it is important to know there is also Crimean Tatar population. Yeah, we created our milieu using in Kasimskaya Khazanat, Sibir Khazanat, Astrakhan Khazanat, Kazan Khazanat. So it was like the group of Turk population.
Мы общественные политические деятели уже давно ведем работу создать свои независимые государства в пространстве России. Мы хотим, чтобы Россия как империя развалился.
Yeah, we've been long struggling to create an independent government inside Russia. Russia, as an empire, has to be destroyed.
Мы также хотим, чтобы у татар, у чуваш, у удмуртов, башкир, у бурятов, у чеченцев, очень многие народы, когда на данное время колонизируют, чтобы они создали свое независимое государство, чтобы они жили свободно, как живут народы, государства в пространствах Европы, которые дружат, сотрудничают, и у них культурные, экономические, религиозные, у них идет такое дружелюбное, френдли отношение, чтобы было и после развала Российской империи, чтобы и все народы, которые на данное время колонизированы, чтобы так же, как жили европейцы.
Okay, so we want the Chuvash people, Udmurt people, Bashkir people, Buryat people, Chechen people, and all other colonized people manage to have their independent states and organize a friendly commonwealth as Europeans have. Yeah, so with economical, social, and cultural relationships, friendship, yeah, among all those people.
Thank you.
What is your image then of free Bashkortostan?
Я считаю, я также очень много башкир, которые сегодня проживают на территории Республики Башкортостан, и вообще все наше башкирское национальное движение, мы считаем, что мы достойны жить в своем собственном независимом государстве.
I guess that our movement, we all Bashkirs, have right to live in our independent state.
Россия, будучи, являясь в свое время Российской империей, потом Советским Союзом, и разваливалась несколько раз. Сперва при Российской империи отсоединились Польша и Финляндия. При Советском Союзе отсоединилось 15 республик, которые сегодня обрели независимость. Мы ничем не хуже их. И мы тоже так же хотим и надеемся, что Российская империя, потому что по-другому это она империя, она не федерация никакая, она тоже закончится и развалится, и все народы обретут свободу.
So, Russian Empire has undergone several stages of ruination during its history. First of all, like parts of Poland and Finland separated from it after the collapse of Russian Empire in 1917. Then after the collapse of the USSR, more than 15 republics got independency, and we are also worse that we are not like worse than them, so Russian Empire is empire, it's not a federation, and it will come to end finally.
Однако в будущее мы понимаем, что у нас очень тесные, скажем так, взаимоотношения между народами различными, между русскими и другими народами, поэтому мы что предлагаем? Мы предлагаем сперва дать нам независимость, а потом уже мы, возможно, если мы захотим, все вместе собравшись, обсудив это, создать что-то по типу Евросоюза, как вы же сейчас живете. Возможно, с бестаможенными границами, с единой какой-то валютой, с союзом наших армий.
So first of all, we need to get independency, yeah, but afterwards probably we can organize a union, like European, some sort of like European Union, with no internal borders, with similar currency, etc., and army, but it takes time.
Еще я бы хотел заметить, что помимо национальных республик, есть еще такое, как регионалистическое движение.
Apart from national republics, there is also a regionalist movement.
Допустим, есть такие, был опыт отделения, попытки образования своих республик, как Уральская республика, Ингерманландская республика, Сибирская республика. У них у всех когда-то в свое время были попытки образования своей собственной государственности.
So there were some republics inside the Russian Federation that attempted to get their own independence, like Ural Republic, Ingerman Republic, Sibir Republic.
И поэтому вот уже сказал Раджана Рафис о том, что существует Лига свободных наций, куда входят перечисленные народы, но туда входят также как и регионалистические движения. И одна из наших задач также, чтобы именно Россия развалилась и по регионам, которые тоже обрели бы свою субъектность, свои республики, чтобы были Московская республика, чтобы была Южная республика, Казахия, чтобы была Сибирская республика и так далее.
As it has been already said, we organized Free Nation League, and it also includes regional movements, and we want that all regions get their independency, like Moscow Republic, and so on and so forth.
Потому что вот для вас, возможно, это кажется как-то странно, да, или там невозможно, фантастически, но возьмем английскую Великобританию, Великобританскую империю, сейчас есть Канада, сейчас есть Австралия, сейчас есть Новая Зеландия, и они прекрасно живут сами по себе, являясь канадцами, австралийцами и так далее.
So it might seem odd to you, but we can have a look at the experience of the United Kingdom, and the countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, that are largely independent and living their best.
Ну и последнее, я хочу сказать, что вы должны все понимать, что Россия, если она останется такой, какой сейчас есть, она вновь станет империей, даже если сейчас придут к власти либералы условные, никто не дает гарантии, что через 10, через 20 лет она вновь не станет империей и вновь не начнет свою агрессивную войну против других свободных народов.
It is very important to understand that even if liberal government comes up into power in the future in Russia, it doesn't mean that in 20 years it will become an empire again and attempt to occupy other independent territories.
И последнее. Поэтому единственная надежда на то, чтобы избавиться от вот этого вот агрессивного монстра под названием Российской империи, это дезинтегрировать ее на 30-40 независимых демократических государств.
So the only way to get rid of this monster as Russia is to disintegrate it into 30-40 independent states.
Thank you so much. And maybe now Rana can.
Well, it's hard to. I just agree with everything that was said before, and by Ruslan and Rafis, and they actually covered pretty everything concerning that, and maybe just a little bit. I know that a lot of people in the West are afraid of disintegration of Russia because very gloomy images are being presented to the imagination of the people, especially by the so-called, as we mentioned before, Russian liberals such as Mikhail Khodorkovsky, for example, who say that you need to actually support our idea of Russia. It should be a democratic Russia, true federation where rights, human rights are valued and so on. But and they say that if you don't support us, then Russia will disintegrate and there will be chaos, there will be anarchy, there will be gangs. It's like they are saying, practically we are talking about some post-apocalyptic scenario of Mad Max, universe. And we are saying that this is not true. I think that if Russia prevails, it will eventually become such post-apocalyptic universe. It needs to be destroyed because there's nothing really to cling to. There's nothing to value in this huge empire, and this horrible war is showing the true nature of this empire. So it needs to be destroyed, and new democratic states need to appear on its place. It's the only way. And we have actually good examples of how those countries that were able to gain independence after the end of the Soviet Union, like Baltic states, like Ukraine, Moldova. We have also in the East the example of Mongolia that is called actually a paradise, democratic paradise. So we should not really think that preserving Russia we would gain anything, because Russia was not able to build democratic society, so they have nothing to really offer us. We need to learn from those nations that were able to build democratic societies, and that's the only way out that I see.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to follow up on what you said, unfortunately it's not only the people living in Moscow, those in the power particularly, who are afraid of this disintegration. But of course, the West is fears to lose its access to resources and extraction, and those resources are used now to fund the war. And I think it's also a very important point when we speak about self-determination of various peoples, that it's also the lands on which upon they live and the resources and the natural wealth that would be then something that not Moscow controls and redistributes in the world, but those people can deal with, so to say, and maybe also not see them as just commodities. But I wanted to maybe ask you something about when you speak about the national liberation movements. Obviously, there's word of national, which is quite loaded and has different meanings. And I think also in the West sometimes it has a deliberately negative connotations, but also Russian state uses as a excuse for launching the war on Ukraine. How would you explain what you mean by the word national in the sentence, and upon which ground kind of sense of belonging would be constructed? What about the intertwined histories of many people who live on these lands, and also sometimes Russian people? Yes, this is the question I would like to ask.
Огромное спасибо за это нужный вопрос для нас, для представителей колонизированных народов. Я защищаю в Татарстане права татарского народа, в том числе защищаю тюрков в России, в том числе я защищаю украинцев, критиковал президента Путина.
Thank you for such an important question. When I was defending the rights in Tatarstan, I also defended the rights of Turks people and Ukrainian people, and I was manifesting and declaring against President Vladimir Putin.
Я писал статьи, даже организовывал протестные акции, митинги в Турции, в том числе, также в других государствах и в Татарстане. Путин я сравнил с Адольфом Гитлером. За это я получил 3 года тюрьмы. Из этих 3 года я 1,5 года сидел один в камере.
So I organized gatherings, protest gatherings in different countries, namely in Turkey, and there I compared Putin with Adolf Hitler. And after that I was imprisoned for 3 years, and out of these 3 years I spent
3 года, да, 1,5.
And 1.5 years I was in solo, incarcerated, like personally.
На данное время я живу в Англии, но очень жаль то, что историю колонизированных народов в России очень плохо знают европейцы. Вот недавно я посмотрел исторический фильм в Англии. Там даже исторический документальный фильм предоставляет такое своим зрителям, как будто Казанский хан, Астраханский, все ханства, бывшие ханства, как будто это территории Чингисхана. Типа как русские завоевали чингисханские, монгольские территории. А на самом деле, вот мы татары, поволжские татары, мы булгары татары. Жаль, что европейцы не знают историю колонизированных народов России.
Now I live in the United Kingdom, and I've recently seen a documentary historical film, and it proved that Europeans have little knowledge of the history of colonized people in the territory of Russia, because there they presented this history as if all Khans were the territory of Genghis Khan, and it's actually not true, and those were independent subjects, and it shouldn't be presented like that. Yeah, Europeans should know more about history of colonized people.
Огромное спасибо сегодня то, что участникам, вам всем и организаторам Мы такие площадки во всех странах Европы должны провести именно представители Конференции народов, чтобы объяснить, в чем суть, эмпирическая сущность преступного режима Путина.
I'm really thankful for the organizers for creating such a platform for the discussion, and such platforms should be organized in all European countries to demonstrate the evil and crime essence of Putin regime.
Thank you very much.
Для меня интересно, вот вы являетесь либералами, демократами, что для вас важнее, ресурсы или жизнь десятков народов?
I'm asking you as liberals, Democrats, what do you value more, resources or lives of millions of people?
Вы боитесь потерять возможность в тепле сидеть зимой, чтобы у вас было тепло, газ был, а мы исчезаем, вы поймите это.
You're afraid of getting cold during the winter because gas shortage, and we are afraid of extinction. Just get that.
Чтобы вы понимали, о чем идет речь, я вам скажу так, что, допустим, башкиры, 1/3 башкир, это 1,5 миллиона народа, не знает на сегодняшний день своего родного языка и считает свой родной язык русский.
Yeah, for you to make a picture, 1/3 of Bashkir people don't speak their native language, and they believe that Russian is their native language.
Чтобы вы понимали представление масштаба ассимиляции тех процессов, 5 из 5 миллионов татар Российской Федерации, 1 миллион не знает своего языка.
1 million of people, they don't know their mother tongue.
Мы исчезаем, над нами проходит ассимиляционный лингвоцид. Мы называем лингвоцид, когда идет уничтожение нашего языка.
We call it linguicide when the destruction of our language is taking place.
Помимо этого, мы теряем в численности. Допустим, за перепись между 2002 и 2010 годом нас башкир стало на 80, почти на 90 тысяч стало меньше.
Yeah, so our population is also decreasing. Between 2002 and 2010, almost 90,000 people less were listed during the population register.
Наших лидеров, национальных лидеров сажают в тюрьмы. Айрат Мухамедов, один из лидеров башкирского национального движения, сейчас сидит, ему дали 9 лет только за то, что он говорил о федерализме.
Our leaders are being imprisoned. One of them, Айрат Мухамедов, is being imprisoned for 9 years just for talking about federalism.
У нас нет политических партий, которые бы на республиканских или региональных политических партий, чтобы отстаивали свои интересы перед Москвой. Их просто запретили.
We have no political party that would have stand for our interests. They were abandoned and prohibited.
Нам насаждают из Москвы глав. Мы не сами выбираем, нам их ставят.
Our heads are being appointed in Moscow. It's not the people that we choose to rule in our territories.
Поэтому, когда люди в Европе боятся слова национализм или национальное какое-то движение, для нас вы должны понять, что это слово созвучно с патриотизмом.
So when people in Europe are afraid of the word nationalism, you need to understand that for us it sounds like patriotism.
Иначе, по-другому, мы просто исчезнем, и вы должны нас понимать, что мы боремся за свое выживание.
Otherwise we will disappear, and you need to understand that we are fighting for our survival.
I would like to cite Franz Fanon, who was already cited today. He said that nationalism is medicine for the wounds of colonialism. It is actually true that for nations that are colonized, the only remedy to overcome the wounds, the trauma, and to gain sovereignty, first of all, to decolonize themselves, is nationalism. And it's not that nationalism is something bad, something, it's like, a disease that, one needs to get rid of as soon as possible. I think that Europe already is past that stage, and we are only getting there. We are only trying to find our own grounds, and we are not against Russians, for example, because in Buryatia, I know a lot of people, Russians, my friends, who are actually supporting the struggle. They support us, and they also think that it's going to be better for everyone in Buryatia if we gain independence. In Siberia, there are, for example, Siberian regionalists. There are also regionalists in the Far East, and during anti-Putin's protests several years ago, there were slogans saying that, we don't need Moscow, we should stop feeding Moscow. And it's a distinct feature. This so-called Russian Federation is actually a very superficial structure. And it is only, there was a documentary actually shot at the beginning of the 2000s saying oil, and it was about Siberia sending oil and all the resources to Moscow and getting nothing, not even decent roads. It's impossible to travel from some parts of Siberia because there are no roads, and even air. By air, it is impossible. For example, there was my friend from Sakha, Yakutia. They needed to go to Magadan, which is really not that far from Yakutsk, and it was so expensive to fly from Yakutsk to Magadan. It made more sense to fly to Moscow and then from Moscow to Magadan. That's what is Russian Federation really. It's like no communication between regions, no ties, because these corrupt the corrupt government only think about how they can, get more and more and more wealth, and leaving those regions with nothing. That's why I think that this question of, when people are afraid that somehow there will be ethnic cleansing in this new nation states, it doesn't have really grounds, because in Buryatia Russians are the majority, and it's impossible for the minority that Buryats are in the beyond like 30% of the population to do any of those things, right? So it's not about it.
You wanted to add a few words on that, right?
Также я хотел добавить, что вот по поводу, когда говорили о ресурсах, о том, что Европа переживает, с кем она будет торговать ресурсами и так далее. Я хочу сказать, что все эти ресурсы, о которых вы говорите, газ, нефть, золото, медь, цинк и так далее, все это находится в наших республиках национальных. Это у нас все. И Москва выкачивает из нас, торгуя с вами, отнимая у нас.
So when we were talking about the fear of trading the resources, with whom will Europeans trade the resources in the future if Russia disappears, it is important to understand that all the resources, all zinc and so on and so forth are located in our states, in our regions, and Moscow is just draining us of these resources.
В Москве вообще нет никаких ресурсов. Она живет за счет нас. И мы, будучи независимыми свободными государствами, мы могли бы с вами напрямую торговать, минуя вот эту прокладку под названием Москва.
So Moscow basically has no resources, and we as independent states could be trading directly without this part as in an unimportant part called Moscow.
Насчет ресурсов хочу сказать, Республика Татарстан в Москву каждый год отправляет 870 миллиардов рублей в федеральный центр.
So about the resources, I want to say that Tatarstan is sending 870 million rubles a year to every year to Moscow.
Я присоединяюсь к предложению Руслана. Действительно, мы напрямую можем в Европу отправить свои нефть, газ и другие природные ресурсы.
Yeah, I join Ruslan that we can directly send natural resources to Europe.
Еще я хочу сказать, и это уже будет мое последнее выступление сегодня, европейцы, в том числе тут и итальянцы, вот, насчет оппозиционеров думают, что они действительно радикальные оппозиции, которые выступают против Путина. Я именно хочу сказать насчет Ходорковского, Навального, Каспарова.
Yeah, so Europeans, Italians in particular, are thinking that opposition in Russia are real opposition. I'm talking about Navalny, Khodorkovsky, and Kasparov.
Да, действительно, они оппозиционеры, но они рвутся к власти. Если они придут к власти, они будут Путиным номер 2. Они будут такими же имперцами, когда Путин завоевал, отобрал Крым, когда российские войска вошли в Грузию, также когда участвуют в Сирии, в других мировых других государствах, когда вооруженные силы участвуют против оккупации, они никогда не осуждали Путина, а значит они имперцы.
But basically, although they are saying they were against Putin, but all they are doing is struggle for power. When they get this power, they will be the same imperialists. Because when Russia annexed Crimea, when Russia invaded Georgia, when Russia started participating and bombing Syria, they said no word against that.
Когда-то я дружил с Каспаровым, Ходорковским, Навальным, даже проводили совместные форумы, протестных акций, участвовали в разных мероприятиях, но в данное время наши пути разошлись. Они уже нам не друзья.
Once I used to be friends with Khodorkovsky, Navalny, Kasparov. We used to make common forums and platforms, but our ways parted since that time. We are not friends anymore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Also, I just wanted to make a quick intervention. If someone from the audience would like to ask something and has a particular question, please just raise the hand. I think it's all good. My question would be relating to something that Ruslan was saying before, and Rafis as well, about lingual side, right? For example, personally, I'm one of these Tatars who, countless Tatars whose native language is Russian, although I am from a Russian family, from a Tatar family, and spoke Tatar until I was 2, so it is happening. And the question would be that I have is relates to cultural policies, and since this event also happens within the framework of has something to do with culture, I just wondered what does cultural politics of resistance mean and what they do within this time when in Russia it is clearly not possible to, or very hard to conduct political resistance and political activism that is prohibited because one is sent to prison immediately, if not worse. So is culture maybe something where preserving of language and habits and cultural production and work still relevant, or is it something that is secondary to the political struggle? I just wonder about that.
Спасибо за интересный вопрос. Я вот хочу сказать, что на сегодняшний день из наших культур сделали, знаете, вот оставили только фольклор. Мы создали из наших республик, из национальных наших народов какие-то фольклорные ансамбли, которые танцуют, поют и пляшут на потеху приезжающим высоким гостям из Москвы.
Our culture has been turned largely into folklore, and our republics are represented by ensembles and groups that are singing and dancing to please the guests from Moscow.
Это вот то, что нужно москвичам. Когда говорят о высокой культуре какой-то настоящей, то я вам хочу такой привести пример, что, допустим, у нас недавно сняли с репертуара спектакль, который создали башкирские наши драматурги.
So that's what they actually want when it comes to high culture. I want to tell you one example. There was a play written by a Bashkir author, and it was taken out of repertoire of the theater.
Там рассказывалась настоящая история о том, как женщина башкирская, которая участвовала в восстании против русских, против Российской империи, ее поймали, осудили, сделали крепостной и насильно крестили.
So it tells actually the real story of a woman who participated in the revolts against Russian Empire, and she was captured, she was turned into a slave and baptized.
Она несколько раз сбегала, возвращалась к своей родной религии ислам, ее ловили, возвращали обратно, и на последний раз просто сожгли.
She escaped several times. She tried to get back to her native religion, Islam, and then they returned her back those several times, and for the last time they just burned her.
И вот когда об этом наши башкирские драматурги пытались рассказать, после первого же показа по звонку из Москвы этот спектакль сняли как спектакль, который разжигает межнациональную рознь.
So after the first demonstration of this play, there was a call from Moscow, and this play was censored as the one that causes national tensions between the people.
Хотя это наша история, понимаете. Если взять об истории, то, допустим, в школе рассказывают, раньше мы сами выпускали свои учебники истории, наша республика в 90-х годах сама выпускала, где мы рассказывали настоящую историю. Но сейчас нам запрещено выпускать самим историю. Москва сама изготавливает для нас учебники, либо мы, если пишем учебники, то они проходят цензуру в Москве. И там только то, что нужно для Москвы.
And even textbooks on history they used to be written in our republic, but now they are published and written in Moscow. And even if some of local author is written history, it should be approved in Moscow, and there is only the right version of history from the Moscow point of view that is presented in those books.
Поэтому, когда говоришь о культуре, ни о какой развитии культуры не может идти речь. Когда народ угнетается, когда есть цензура, когда запрещено вообще говорить правду, или то, что было на самом деле в истории твоего народа, ни о какой культуре невозможно идти речь.
There is no way we can talk about culture in such situation when a people is being oppressed, is being censored, and it is impossible to tell the truth about your own history. Culture is irrelevant in such situation.
John, what's your perspective on that?
According to the so-called Red Book of extinct languages that are disappearing languages, all languages of the peoples that live in the Russian Federation are actually endangered. Some languages are already dying languages, some are in a slightly better position, but all but Russian. And yet the Russian government is doing everything to promote Russian language, not only in Russia but also abroad, and it spends millions and billions of dollars for that. And right now they are killing people in Ukraine for the sake of Russian language. And also there is a big deal when, for example, something happens in the Baltic states, and there is a cry all over media in Russia that Russian language is being somehow persecuted in those states. And no one talks about dying languages in Russia. In 2019, on September 10th, 2019, an Udmurt scholar and activist went, he came to the central square of Saransk, the capital of Udmurt Republic, and he was yes, Albert Razin. He was holding a banner, and it had words on it. If tomorrow my language disappears, I am ready to die today. These were the words of the Dagestani Avar poet Rasul Gamzatov. And after that, he set himself on fire. The death, this horrible death of this hero, really was a shock for everyone in the national republics, because we felt for it, because it was what is happening to our languages as well. I'm sorry. This is a very emotional moment. So this year we commemorated, as a League of Free Nations, we commemorated the death of Albert Razin by holding a round table on the linguicide of the languages in the Russian Federation. Also, we went to the consulates of the Russian Federation in different countries with flowers and with his portrait of Albert Razin and the candles to commemorate his memory, because he became a symbol of resistance, cultural resistance.
По поводу культуры народов, это частейшая идет дискриминация, ущемление народов, не только татар, всех колонизированных народов Российской Федерации. Вот приведу только один пример.
About culture, it's a pure discrimination, not only of Tatars, but of all colonized peoples.
Вот Путин уже больше 20 лет у власти. Первые 10 лет, когда он правил, еще не было такого жесткого морального, физического уничтожения колонизированных народов.
Putin is over 20 years holding his power, and first 10 years were moderate, and there was no such harsh extinguishing of colonized people.
Мы, татары, имеем тысячелетнюю историю, однако очень для нас трагический момент. Вот уже почти около 10 лет этот центр Казани, это Кремль, Кремль не только в Москве, у нас тоже есть татарский, казанский Кремль. Там мы, вот, казанские татары, не можем проводить культурные, общественные, политические, исторические мероприятия в центре Казани. Нам запрещено. Но зато русские там, русским дано уже возможность. Если украинцев захватит в Киеве, в центре Киева, украинцам тоже будет запрещено проводить подобные мероприятия.
Our history is thousands of years long, but still we are denounced of the possibility to hold any events in our historical center. There is Kremlin, not only in Moscow, but in Kazan as well, and all Tatars, they cannot gather there for any cultural, historical, or social events, unlike Russians who are allowed to. And if Russians occupy Kiev, Ukrainians as well won't be able to have any meetings in Kiev or whenever.
This is strikingly reminding me of a conversation I had a few days ago with Belarusian colleagues and cultural activists who told me actually that it is impossible anymore and prohibited to hold tour guides in Minsk, in Belarusian language. You get into prison. So this is shows us extension of this logic and regime outside of Russia. And of course, this kind of imperialist policies that are imposed now within Russia is with precedent and mirror the imperial histories of also European countries, and remind me of this book by Kinin writer Nubugi called The Decolonizing Mind, where he describes this particular tendency of first they come the soldiers, right, and the second they colonize you in the schoolrooms and school boards by taking the language that allows you to relate with others and to the environment and the land that you are from. So, just, yeah.
I would like to correct myself. I said that he went in Saransk, but it's actually Ijevsk, the capital of Udmurtskая Republic.
Thank you. Just,
Я еще добавил по поводу языка, дискриминации нашего языка, потому что язык это все-таки самый главный идентификатор национальности.
I'd like to add on the discrimination of language, because language is actually the main point of identity of any nation.
В 2017 году Владимир Путин заявил прямо о том, что везде должен изучаться русский язык как государственный язык, но национальные языки государственные не должны изучаться в обязательном порядке, а только добровольно.
So in 2011, Vladimir Putin announced that Russian is a compulsory language is obligatory language to learn, while others' home mother tongues are not so important to be studied in schools, so they don't have it to study.
Поэтому в школах сейчас, в национальных башкирских, татарских, удмуртских, бурятских и других школах, везде 1 час в неделю изучается родной язык государственный и 5 часов в неделю русского языка.
So every school in those republics have 1 hour of mother tongue per week versus 5 hours of Russian language per week in schools.
Есть такой предмет, как русская литература. Однако такого предмета, как башкирская литература, нету. И при такой предмет, как русская литература, он обязательный.
There is such discipline as Russian literature, but there is no discipline as Bashkir literature. and Russian literature is an obligatory discipline.
И последнее скажу, что нам, в первую очередь моим детям, я бы хотел, чтобы они изучали своих писателей, поэтов башкирских. И только потом изучали русских писателей и поэтов. Но, однако, нам не дают такого выбора.
I'd like my kids to learn our Bashkir poets and writers, and only afterwards those Russian poets and writers. But we have no such opportunity.
Yeah, and I think this is also something that is reflected also in European knowledge production systems that, and Western also, most universities that have, and most universities do have Slavic department, they mostly are focusing on Russian language, Russian culture. There are lack of books, even material available, even within the Slavic departments, on other Slavic languages as Ukrainian and Belarusian, for instance. And it's not to speak about, of course, the many literatures and cultures of indigenous people living in Russia. They are not represented at all. So it's also to think something about how, let's say, we or you organize this kind of knowledge production really here in Rome and elsewhere. But I wanted to give a word to Selena. You wanted to ask a question, right, from the audience. I will give it to you.
First of all, I would like to thank you for presenting your political ideas and your culture. I have to say that I belong to this probably large group of people that did not know about your struggles. Yes, thank you for being here. And then second, I would like to apologize for a probably very naive question that comes out of my ignorance. But I wondered if we go back to the political aspect of your organization and of your engagement. When we look at history, it almost never happened that a separatist movement would not end in a sort of a military conflict, in a war. So I wondered, in your vision, how do you think about that? And do you have also the hope, or yes, let's say hope, that it could happen without a military conflict, without a war? And if yes, what would be the partners that you need for such a huge political endeavor? In the sense, I guess it would be probably Europe, but that's maybe not enough. Maybe you're seeking alliances in Asia, in China. So I wonder about the concrete political steps that you are taking in order to make your vision come true.
Sasha translates. Thank you so much.
That's what we are doing actually by creating such partnerships as Free Nations League. We are creating this future space, safe space for our nations to coexist peacefully. And for example, if we are talking about Buryatia, we have nothing to actually, we don't have any claims to like the territory of Tuva or of Sakha, Yakutia. There are some, of course, there are some issues about territories sometimes, but it's what is if anything arises, then I mean they can be always negotiated. But as I said, really, it's not about. Usually, you know, when we talk about separatism, it's like when a territory wants to get away from some central states. If we talk about Russia, we are talking about a failed state right now, because it is failing, and it will be a failed state pretty soon. So Russia won't have any resources to try and stop any region if they decide to get away. And that's why we are also talking about not only republics but also regions, because I'm from Siberia, and I know that there is no really deep connection of people who live in Siberia to Moscow. It's quite superficial, the whole structure, the whole country, and I don't think that there will be any bloodshed after that. We have the example of, for example, the peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union, and I think that it's not all these stories about conflicts, they are a thing of the past, really.
Для нас, татар-башкир, также для тюркских народов России, это самые первые пока союзники Турции, Казахстан, Азербайджан. Они как-то морально, в моральном плане нас поддерживают.
For us, Tatars and Bashkirs, our main partners are Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan. They are supporting morally us.
К нам, татарам, обращались несколько раз чеченские лидеры. Давайте мы поможем вам приобрести независимость вооруженным путем. Отправим к вам татарам около 1500 своих военных. Мы вам поможем приобрести независимость. Мы несколько раз отказались.
We used to receive several messages from Chechen leaders who advised us to, like, let's help us. We will send you weaponed military, and so you will conquer your freedom with weapon. But we renounced those suggestions.
Чеченцам, конечно, огромное спасибо, но это будет очень большое массовое кровопролитие в Поволжских республиках. Мы этого не хотим. Хотим мирным путем освободиться от империализма, от русского империализма.
So we are thankful to Chechens, but it's going to be a huge bloodshed. So we are looking for a peaceful way to escape from Russian imperialism, to get rid of it.
Thank you.
Я бы хотел ответить на ваш вопрос следующим образом. Ход истории невозможно остановить. Россия в любом случае распадется.
Yeah, I'd like to answer your question in this way, that there is nothing that can stop the flow of history, and Russia is going to dissolve.
Потому что Россия это классическая империя, а империи они все распадаются в итоге.
Because Russia is a classical empire, and all empires are destined to collapse.
И вот для того, чтобы на построссийском пространстве не образовалось 20-30 каких-то серых государств по типу ЛНР или ДНР, необходима помощь всего цивилизованного мира.
So we need the help of the whole civilized world to avoid creating 20-30 gray states like LNR or DNR on Donbass. Yeah, that would be like very dubious.
Европейские, ну и вообще политики всего мира цивилизованного должны обратить внимание на наши национальные движения, помочь нам информационно, обучить наших политические, признать нашу независимость наших национальных республик. Все сделать для того, чтобы процесс прошел как можно безболезненно, потому что в любом случае он произойдет.
So the leaders of the civilized world, they need to recognize our initiative. They need to recognize our national movements, so the whole process could go painlessly.
Ну, в принципе, все.
Well, on this note, thank you very much, Ruslan, Rafis, and Jan. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you to the audience for participating, listening. Thank you for organizing this lesson, particularly because it is not really obvious to try to do this kind of bridges within Russian context, so to say, and but I think it's important. So thank you, and thanks everyone.
В заключение я хочу, уважаемый Висханов, подарить карту Идель Урала.
He wants to present a map of Idel Ural to Lesa.